In the shadowed corridors of Cold War history, few documents have stirred as much unease and retrospective alarm as the declassified memorandum known as Operation Northwoods. Drafted in 1962 by the United States Department of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, this top-secret proposal outlined a series of false flag operations intended to manipulate public opinion and justify military intervention in Cuba, though never implemented. The plan's audacity and moral implications reveal a disturbing willingness among high-ranking officials to sacrifice truth, legality, and even civilian lives in pursuit of geopolitical objectives. Operation Northwoods was conceived during a period of intense tension between the United States and Cuba. Fidel Castro's rise to power in 1959 had transformed the island into a symbol of communist defiance just 90 miles from Florida's shores. Castro's nationalization of American businesses, his alignment with the Soviet Union, and his support for revolutionary movements across Latin America made him a prime target for U.S. containment strategies. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 had already demonstrated the lengths to which the U.S. was willing to go to unseat Castro. In the wake of that debacle, the Pentagon sought more covert and psychologically manipulative means to achieve its aims. The document, titled Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba, was presented to Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara on March 13, 1962. It was authored under the direction of General Lyman Lemnis, then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The proposals within were chillingly specific. They included plans to stage terrorist attacks in American cities, hijack civilian aircraft, sink refugee boats, and even fabricate the deaths of American citizens, all to be blamed on the Cuban government. The goal was to create a pretext for war, one that would galvanize public support and legitimize a full-scale invasion. Among the most disturbing elements of the plan was the suggestion to simulate the shooting down of a civilian airliner. The document proposed using a drone aircraft painted to resemble a commercial plane, filled with remote-controlled equipment and possibly a group of mock passengers. The plane would be destroyed over Cuban waters, and the incident would be presented as an act of aggression by the Cuban military. Another proposal involved orchestrating bombings in Miami and Washington, D.C., with planted evidence pointing to Cuban operatives. These acts of domestic terrorism were not merely theoretical, they were mapped out in detail, with timelines, logistical considerations, and anticipated media responses. The psychological manipulation embedded in Operation Northwoods was as sophisticated as it was sinister. The architects of the plan understood the power of narrative, the emotional resonance of martyrdom, and the volatility of public fear. By manufacturing a crisis, they aimed to bypass the democratic process and provoke a war that might otherwise lack popular or congressional support. This strategy was not unique to Northwoods. It echoed historical precedents such as the Reichstag fire in Nazi Germany and the Gulf of Tonkin incident in Vietnam. What set Northwoods apart was its origin within the highest echelons of the U.S. military and its targeting of American citizens. President John F. Kennedy ultimately rejected the proposals. His refusal to authorize Operation Northwoods marked a critical moment in the preservation of constitutional norms and civilian oversight of the military. Shortly thereafter, Kennedy replaced Lemnitzer as chairman of the Joint Chiefs and reassigned him to a NATO post. The operation was buried, its details classified and largely forgotten until the 1990s, when the Assassination Records Review Board released the documents as part of its investigation into the Kennedy assassination. The public reaction was one of shock and disbelief. That such a plan had been seriously considered by the U.S. government challenged assumptions about the ethical boundaries of national security policy. The implications of Operation Northwoods extend far beyond its immediate historical context. It serves as a case study in the psychology of power, the erosion of democratic safeguards, and the dangers of unchecked militarism. The plan's reliance on deception, spectacle, and emotional manipulation reveals a profound cynicism about the American public and the principles of open governance. It also underscores the vulnerability of democratic societies to internal subversion, particularly when fear and ideology override reason and accountability. One of the most unsettling aspects of the Northwoods proposal is its normalization of violence as a tool of persuasion. The document treats acts of terror not as aberrations but as strategic instruments, calibrated to elicit specific political outcomes. This instrumental view of human suffering reflects a broader trend in Cold War policy, where ethical considerations were often subordinated to geopolitical imperatives. The logic of containment, deterrence, and psychological warfare created a climate in which even the most extreme measures could be rationalized as necessary evils. The legacy of Operation Northwoods also invites reflection on the role of secrecy in democratic governance. The plan was classified not because it protected national security, but because it threatened the legitimacy of the institutions that conceived it. Its exposure decades later did not result in prosecutions or formal apologies, but rather a quiet acknowledgement of its existence. This pattern of concealment and delayed disclosure is emblematic of a broader tension between transparency and control in modern states. When governments operate in secrecy, they risk undermining the very principles they claim to defend. In examining it is essential to consider the cultural and institutional factors that made such a plan conceivable. The Cold War fostered a siege mentality within the U.S. defense establishment, characterized by paranoia, ideological rigidity, and a willingness to blur moral lines. The fear of communist expansion was not merely strategic, it was existential, shaping policy decisions at every level. Within this context, the idea of sacrificing a few lives to save the nation became not only acceptable, but commendable. This mindset, while understandable in its historical moment, reveals the peril of allowing fear to dictate policy. The ethical questions raised by Operation Northwoods remain unresolved. Can a democracy justify deception in the name of national security? What are the limits of executive power in times of crisis? How can citizens hold their leaders accountable when the truth is obscured by classification and propaganda? These questions are not merely academic. They are vital to the health of any democratic society. The Northwoods episode reminds us that vigilance, skepticism, and civic engagement are essential bulwarks against the abuse of power. The declassification of Operation Northwoods also had a ripple effect on public trust. For many, it confirms suspicions about the capacity of governments to act against their own citizens. It fueled conspiracy theories, deepened cynicism, and challenged the narrative of American While some dismissed the plan as an anomaly, others saw it as indicative of a deeper pathology within the national security apparatus. This divergence in interpretation reflects the broader struggle to reconcile ideals with reality in the conduct of state. In the years since its revelation, Operation Northwoods has become a touchstone for critics of U.S. foreign policy and advocates of government transparency. It is cited in debates about whistleblowing, surveillance, and the ethics of intervention. Its lessons are invoked in discussions of 9/11s, the Iraq War, and other controversial episodes where truth and narrative collided. The plan's audacity and moral ambiguity continued to provoke reflection, debate, and a re-evaluation of the boundaries between security and liberty. Ultimately, Operation Northwoods is not just a historical curiosity, it's a mirror held up to the soul of a nation. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of power, the fragility of democratic norms, and the capacity for it challenges us to ask not only what our leaders are willing to do in our name, but what we are willing to tolerate in theirs. In this sense, the secrets of Operation Northwoods are not confined to the past, they are warnings for the future, etched into the fabric of history as a testament to the enduring struggle between principle and expediency.